Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So we're still doing this chapter here now of kafara. So one of the things you do in kafara is you free a slave, right? So which types of slaves you can free? We're doing that there now, and there you see there you can't free a slave, which a mad slave, right? And likewise you can't free a mudabbar and a umme walad, right? Now here we go. فإن أعتق مكاتبا لم يؤدي شيئا جاز. Then if he frees a mukatab slave who would not pay anything as yet, he didn't pay anything to the master as yet, so then it will be permissible on behalf of the kafara that the master has to pay, right? Khilafan li Shafi rahmatullah alayh. Imam Shafi says no. And what's his proof? لو أنه استحق الحرية بجهة الكتابة فأشبه المدبرة. Imam Shafi is that this mukatab slave deserves freedom from the avenue of kitabat. So he resembles a mudabbar. Just like a mudabbar, you can't free a mudabbar slave on behalf of your kafara, right? Likewise, you say a mukatab slave, you can't free. You can't if you can free him. Imam Shafi just say you can't free him. You can free him, but it won't suffice on behalf of kafara. Why? Because Imam Shafi says that this slave has already now taken a step into freedom via the kitabat avenue. Just like a mudabbar slave and a umme walad, they already stepped into freedom because of being a mudabbar umme walad. You understand? They're not total slaves now anymore. ولنا أن الرق قائم من كل وجه على ما بينا. Our dalil is that the slavery is still existing from every way, every aspect upon that which we explained, right? In other words, as long as he didn't pay any money, he is still a total slave. This mukatab. وَلِقَوْلِ Islam al-mukatabu abdun ma baqiya alay dirhamun. And because of Nabi Kareem says statement that the mukatab is a slave as long as one dirham is still remaining upon him, right? وَالْكِتَابَةُ لَا يُنَافِيهِ فَإِنَّهُ فَكُّ الْحَجَرِ بِمَنْزِلَةِ الْإِذْنِ فِي التِّجَارَةِ. And kitabat, when you do a kitabat with a slave here, it doesn't contradict slavery. In other words, kitabat and slavery, they're not opposite things, right? Why? Because what it means, what does kitabat mean? It is the removal of the restriction, right, on the rank of permission in trade. In other words, just like when you give your slave ma'zoon, you make your slave ma'zoon, right? He becomes a slave who's allowed to do trade. You removed that restriction, so he's now free to do trade, but he's still a slave. He's a total slave, but he's free to do trade. So they said the kitabat is the same thing, right? Illa annahu bi'iwazin, except that now this is what an exchange. You understand? So in other words, you allowed him to do trade, right? And then he needs to pay you for his freedom, right? فَيَلْزَمُ مِنْ جَانِبِهِ. So now, because it is what a compensation now, you told him, if you pay this amount, then you get your freedom. So it's not something that a master can pull back. Unlike the ma'azoon slave, the master can just say, okay, you stop trading now, and he makes an announcement in the market. The slave of mine no more has got permission to do trade. And then all the shopkeepers need to understand that they need to wrap up now with this particular slave, right? But when it comes to the mukatab now, the master can't just unilaterally break that kitabat. Why? Because he told him, if you pay this amount, then you get your freedom. That's what kitabat means. You understand it? So, so it's like out of the master's hand. So it becomes binding from the side of the master, right? Right. Now they say, walau kana mani'an, right? If we accept now, we accept and say, okay, Imam Shafi says that kitabat prevents you from freeing the slave on behalf of kafara, right? So we say now, if we accept that it is a preventer, right? Then the kitabat will become first with the demand of freeing, right, is huwa yahtamiluhu, because it carries that possibility, right? So if we say now, what we're saying here is that if we agree and say, okay, look, kitabat, we agree, will become now fasakh, right? The kitabat is actually a preventer. Uh, him being a mukatab is a preventer to free him on behalf of kafara, right? So we say what will it now? What will happen now is that because he needs to free the slave now, right, for his kafara, the kitabat will automatically break. It will become first automatically. It will cancel off. You understand it? And they say is huwa yahtamilu, because kitabat is such a thing that carries the possibility of breaking, of being cancelled. You understand it? Right. Illa annahu yuslamu lahu al-aksabu wal-awladu. Right. Now, if a kitabat normally breaks, right, and it becomes trust, then what happens is that anything that the mukatab had earned goes to the master. Say you're doing the master do a akte kitabat with the slave, right? Slave tried, and he threw in the towel. And he goes back into slavery and says, I can't do it anymore. And he goes back into slavery. Then whatever he owned at that time goes to the master, right? But however, here in this particular case, it won't go to the master. Rather, the earnings and the children will be secure for the mukatab, because he's being freed now. Remember, he's getting his freedom now because the master has to pay a kafara. So he's going free and he's going to get whatever earnings. It won't go to the master now, right? لأن العتق في المحل بجهة الكتابة, right? Because the freeing still came via kitabat. The freeing in this particular case still came via kitabat. So therefore, it will still remain with the mukatab. You understand it? Right. Only anna al-fasakha zaruriyun. Or there's a better answer. Or because the cancellation of that kitabat was out of necessity. Right? And remember the qaida of necessity, az-zarura tataqaddaru bi qadri az-zarura. Right? So the cancellation of the kitabat here was out of necessity. La yadharu fi haqqil waladi wal kasbi. It will not become apparent in the right of the children and the earnings. So what we say now, the kitabat became cancelled. Why? Because he needed to free that mukatab slave on behalf of his kitabat. So we allowed that and say, go ahead. So he freed the slave. The thing that happens now is normally when a kitabat is cancelled, the earnings and the children of the mukatab goes into the possession of the master. But in this case, it won't go, right? Because the kitabat was cancelled out of necessity only. You understand it? You got it now, right? When isharaw abahu or ibnahu yanwi bishira'il kafara tajaza anha. And if he purchases his father or his son, and he intends with the purchasing kafara, it will suffice on behalf of him. Remember, whenever you purchase your father or your son or your rahimim mahramin's relative, then utika alay, he becomes immediately free. You can't own your rahimim mahramin. You understand it? You can't own your close relative. So the moment a person purchases his father or his son, and while before purchasing, he intended kafara, because he knew that slave, his father or his son will be freed, right? So he made the intention of kafara, it will suffice. وقال الشافعي رحمه الله يجوز. Imam Shafi rahmatullahi says, no, don't be permissible. وعلى هذا الخلاف كفارة اليمين. And upon this ikhtilaf is the kafara of oaths also. In other words, the same law will apply to a kafara of oaths. والمسألة تأتيك في كتاب الأيمان إن شاء الله تعالى. This masla will come to you in كتاب الأيمان إن شاء الله تعالى. فإن أعتق نصف عبد مشترك وهو موسر وضمن قيمة باقيه لم يجوز عند أبي حنيفة رحمة الله وجوز عندهما. Right. So now he needs to free a slave on behalf of kafara. Now what he did, he freed half of a partnered slave. So he owns half slave, all right? Understand it? وهو موسر, and he's a rich person. So he owns half the slave here, right? And he's a rich person, and he takes responsibility for the money of the remainder. So now he needs to pay. Remember, a slave, once he's got a little bit of freedom, is as good as he's free. You understand it? A slave can't be half in slavery and half free. If he's half free, That means he's totally free. You understand it? Right. So in this particular case now, even to go free, he's half, right? But he was a rich person and he said, now I'll pay my partner out. According to Imam Banifa Rahmanullah, this won't be possible and it will be permissible according to Sahibain. لأنه يملك نصيب صاحبه بالزمان, because he owned the share of his companion by taking responsibility. فصار معتقا كل العبد عن الكفارة. So he now becomes a person who freed the entire slave on behalf of the kafara, وهو ملكه, whilst he was the owner of that slave now. So when he freed the half according to Sahibain, and he took responsibility of the other half, right? Then he says, though he owned the other half now, and he freed the whole slave. بخلاف ما إذا كان المعتق معسرا, they say. Contrary to Sahibain is explained now, contrary when the person who's freeing is a poor person, لأن وجب عليه السعاية في نصيب الشريك, because now it becomes wajib upon him now, who the poor person, to work, right, in the share of the partner, or it becomes wajib upon who to work? For the slave to work. For the partner now, because he's a poor person, so he can't pay the other partner out, right? So now, and he freed his half. So that doesn't count on behalf of his kafara, firstly. And only his half is freed, and now the slave must work to pay the other partner out, right? فَيَكُونُ إِعْتَاقًا بِإِوَزٍ now. So now it is an itaq, you are freeing, but you're getting an exchange now. You understand it? Because you didn't free the whole one and the slave had to work for you. وَلِأَبِي حَنِيفَ رَحْمَةً أَنَّ نَصِيبَ صَاحِبِهِ يَنْتَقِسُ عَلَى مِلْقِهِ, right? ثم يتحول إليه بالزمان ومثله يمنع الكفارة. Now Imam Boniver Rahmanullah Zalili said the share of his companion, right? The share of his companion is deficient on his ownership because he only got half. He's talking of the rich person now. Remember the poor person, they both are together, that it won't suffice on behalf of kafara, right? He's talking of the rich person now, that the share of his companion is deficient upon his ownership. That when he freed his half, that time he didn't own the share of his partner, right? So when he freed his half, he didn't as yet own the share of his companion, right? Then it moves to him what taking responsibility. Then he said, okay, I'll pay you out, right? وَمِثْلُهُ يَمْنَعُ الْكَفَّارَةَ, and the likeness of this will prevent kafara. So in other words, you freed the half, and then you bought the other half, and then you freed the other half, and that doesn't suffice on behalf of kafara. Leave it till there.